But Daddy, I'm not tired yet. I'm not. I turned around to see the wide green eyes of my little girl staring up at me. They tried desperately to stay open, but I watched as they slowly drooped and closed, only to snap back open. She clutched her light brown teddy bear to her chest and rubbed her left eye with her balled up hand. Her long thick curls bounced from side to side as she shook her head and refused to acknowledge my hand pointing upstairs to her bedroom. Come on, Nugget, time to go to bed, I told her as I reached for her hand. She protested but accepted, and I let my 4-year-old daughter guide me up to her room. She brushed her teeth on her own, and I situated her bedclothes for her. Almost done in there, I called to her, after the sound of the electric head had ceased for nearly a minute. A muffled response followed. Almost. Gotta get my tongue too. I smiled warmly at the thought of her doing things herself. She's growing up so fast. She trudged into the room and looked at her purple and green shirt and pants laid out before her. My favorite. She clutched the shirt and held it to her face. She inhaled deeply and turned to me. Her brow was furrowed. You can't look at me while I change. Her expression was dead serious. Excuse me? Teacher said it was bad. I rolled my eyes. Fine. If you want to get dressed like a big girl all by yourself, you go right ahead. I stepped out of the room for a minute and closed the door. I heard her struggle and what sounded like a lamp fall. Everything okay in there? My hand went to the doorknob and I turned it. A strange odor wafted towards me. It was an acid smell, like the sickly sweet smell of a fruit that had been out in the sun. Daddy, wait, I can do it. Do you have food in your room? You know the rule about food in your room. A pause, then a giggle. I shrugged my shoulders and waited until I heard her cease her struggle. All done. I came in to see her positively beaming. She stood at the foot of her bed, with her arms outstretched. Her teddy propped on the edge of the bed. Her shirt was on backwards, and one pant leg was not quite rolled all the way down. You're a mess, little nugget, I said as I admired the attempt. She giggled and hopped into bed. There it was again, that sugary sweet scent. What was that? I looked around the room to see if I could spot a source. What have you been eating in your room? Nothing, she responded. Tomorrow we will clean this room up and see. I wrapped the blankets up around her and tucked her in. Wait, Mr. Pickles. She reached for the bear and grabbed it. She held it tight to her chest as I wrapped her back up. I confirmed she was nestled tightly in the blankets and reached for the lamp at her bedside. No bedtime story? Her lips pouted as she pulled the blanket up to her chin. Mr. Pickles' beady black eyes stared at me with equal disappointment. Okay, which one shall it be? I muttered to myself as I turned and pursued her bookshelf. Piggies! I reached for her weathered and worn copy of The Three Little Pigs and sat down at her bedside. I noticed a coffee stain on the back of the book. I didn't remember that from the last time I held it. She beamed at me as I opened the book and began to read. Her look of fear as I described how the wolf approached the house made of straw reminded me of the power of the whimsical mind of a child. The lamp at my daughter's bedside flickered. Then it flickered again and popped. The flash blinded me, and I was forced to close my eyes for a moment. I smelled industrial cleaner. Its pungent odor filled my nostrils and caused me to shake my head and gag. My eyes opened and I realized I was no longer in the warm pink-walled room which belonged to my daughter. I was in a sterile, clinical hospital room, seated on the edge of a metal-railed hospital bed. My daughter, my beautiful baby daughter, sat next to me. I held her hand in mine as the three little pigs rested in my other hand. Her hand was cold. Her lovely curls were gone. Her scalp was bare and pale. She appeared emaciated with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes which gave her a skeletal appearance. Tubes crisscrossed her body and lined her arms as machines beeped all around the room. The room was frigid, like the inside of a walk-in freezer. I felt my body begin to shiver. A nurse approached and spoke to me. Her voice was muffled, like she was far away. Sir, it's time for our chemo. Sir, can you hear me?" The nurse's words echoed and reverberated around the room over and over. "I'm sorry. What?" I stood up and the three little pigs tumbled to the floor. I bent to pick it up just as the nurse did. She knocked over my cup of coffee from the bedside table. It soaked the book cover entirely. "Damn it, I am so sorry," she said as she wiped it down with a towel. The lights in the room flickered once, then twice. My daughter reached out and touched my hand. "Daddy?" I was back in her bedroom. She held my hand. She was warm and vibrant, and all smiles if a bit confused. "Why did you stop, Daddy?" I shook the cobwebs loose from my mind. What the hell just happened? I noticed ripples of goosebumps on my arms. I was still cold. With a deep breath, I exhaled. I could see the fog come from my mouth. I inhaled a second time, and it was gone. Everything was back to normal. "Daddy, are you okay?" "Never better, Nugget." She squeezed my hand tightly, and I felt myself warm up instantly. She gripped my hand so tightly, I felt a tingling sensation in my palm. I finished her bedtime story and she drifted off to sleep. I didn't know what had occurred, but I easily pushed the thought out of my mind and went downstairs to pour myself a drink. I uncorked the bottle of the Cabernet and let it breathe. I grabbed 2 plates from the cabinet. I saw the parking brakes of a car as it backed into the driveway and the sound of the garage door as it slid open. I walked to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of red wine. I heard the doorknob turn and the jingle of keys as my wife walked into the mudroom. I turned the corner and met her gaze. She looked tired and weary. Her shoulders were slouched, and she held her chin down as she entered. It must have been a tough day. I hadn't heard from her at all. I handed her the glass and held my own up. "I can tell you've had a long day, sweetie. Dinner is ready whenever you are. Nugget is already washed up and in bed. You have nothing to do but relax now." Her eyes, tired and lined with dark circles, suddenly came alive. "What did you just say?" Her tone was angry, accusatory. I bristled at the way she spoke to me and became defensive. "I'm sorry, but I thought you would be happy that I took care of things for you." My tone carried more than a hint of dryness. "How dare you?" I saw fire in my wife's eyes now. They scrunched up and I saw hot tears form quickly as she shook her head, a look of disgust on her face when she finally opened them again. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "What is wrong with you? What's your problem? Things haven't been easy the last month or so. I did my best to be of help tonight. For the first time in 6 years of marriage, I shouted at my wife as though she was my enemy. And why have things been so hard, huh? She's only been gone less than a month, but you stand there like nothing happened. And why the hell did you get her bear out?" What? I looked down and saw that I held Mr. Pickles in my right hand. It had a blood stain on it. My blood. My hand was bleeding from a ring of tiny pinprick holes near the wrist. I stammered for words as I stared through my wife, through the walls of the home, and off into the distance. Memories flooded back into me in waves. They were like a tidal wave of pain and misery. Images flashed before my mind's eye. Her limp body as she fell in the yard. The hospital visits. The oncologist explaining the situation. The rounds of chemotherapy, the sleepless nights and exhausted days, the tears and the screams, the funeral. I was brought back to earth by a sound, possibly something my wife said to me. I stared eye to eye with my wife. "Something is in this house with us," I whispered to her. Her head tilted slightly as she pursed her lips, tears still on her cheeks, anger more at the forefront of her emotions. "Come with me, please." I led my wife upstairs and told her to keep her voice down. As we approached the bedroom door, the hairs on my arms stood up. "Whoa, that's weird." My wife's arms were covered in goosebumps as the house suddenly became bitterly cold. I pushed the door open slightly, and we investigated the unnaturally dark bedroom. "Mommy?" I saw her head snap up and her eyes bulge from her face. A look of shock spread and paralyzed her entire body. The bedside lamp in the room flickered on. "Mommy, you look sad. Come sit with me." There she sat, wrapped in her blanket in her purple shirt. She looked as cute as could be, just as I remembered her. No. No, no, no. What is this?" My wife screamed as she dropped to her knees in the hallway. "Mommy, come sit, now." Her voice was deep, altered. The thing that looked like our daughter rose from the seated position. It appeared to float out of the sheets about a foot above the bed. The body stretched and bloated, the skin ripped, and thick clumps of black ooze dripped onto the sheets as the pajamas tore away, to reveal a mutated mass of flesh. The ooze released that sugary sweet diabetic smell. It twisted and wiggled like it had no true form, but somehow still held a face like my little girl. Her sweet brown eyes multiplied and spread across the head and the skin as her fingers flayed open. Her little painted nails clattered to the floor, as did her teeth. One by one they fell from her mouth, as more of the black pus gushed from behind her lips. My wife recoiled and fell onto her butt. I stepped forward and reached for the door to close it. More tentacles tore through the rib cage in endless waves and sizes. Her skin fell like a husk on the bed. A horrible voice boomed from the room. It was deep, nightmarish, and distorted. But it was my daughter's voice. It pleaded with us to understand. "Don't leave, Mommy. It's been so long since we have had a family. You see, we have wandered for eons alone, until we felt your pain across the void. We heard your cries and your whispers, and your prayers. We crossed endless barrens of worlds to be here with you. Your pain was a beacon through the warp. It guided us to you, Mommy. All you must do is take our hand. Take our hand and everything will be just fine. Don't you want to have a family again, Mommy?" A fleshy tentacle shot out of the darkness and latched onto my wife's wrist. She screamed as retracted spikes pierced her skin. It yanked her so hard I thought it dislocated her shoulder. I grabbed her by the other arm in a desperate attempt to help. Her face had a look of desperation and pure terror. More tentacles poured from where my child's fingers used to be and enveloped my wife's entire torso. I pressed my shoulder against the door frame for leverage to fight the inhuman strength I fought against. I felt the wood begin to break and heard it splinter. The molding fractured against the force being put upon it. I gasped for a breath and gave her my hardest tug. It was my last chance. "Help me," she screamed as she was yanked from my grip. She smacked the floor hard and blood leaked from her nostrils. 2 of her fingernails snapped off as she was dragged across the carpet towards the bed. The tentacles retracted back into fingers and the entity began to reform. It held my wife's hand gingerly like the child it pretended to be. I could see purple liquid begin to crawl up my wife's arm, under the skin where it had been punctured. Something flowed in her veins. She stopped her resistance and sat down at the foot of the bed. The creature looked like my sweet baby girl again. It sat back down, fully transformed back into human appearance. My wife stared at me with a warm smile on her face. She wasn't even aware of her injuries any longer. The veins faded and returned to normal. "Honey, are you okay? You're sweating," she said to me as she held our daughter's hand. Blood flowed freely down her face. It coated her teeth and dropped from her chin, but she didn't seem bothered at all. "Yeah, everything is just fine," I responded. She turned and looked at the entity in my daughter's bed. The thing smiled my daughter's smile and spoke with her voice again. Yep, everything is just perfectly splendid." The sing-song voice seemed utterly repulsive to me, as I realized it had control of my wife, just as it had control of me earlier. "I think I will stay with our baby girl for just a little longer. I have missed her all day. Could you bring my dinner to me, sweetie? I am famished," my wife said. Her eyes were alight, and she appeared to be genuinely happy. The first time I had seen her happy in what felt like forever. "You go back to bed, little nugget. I'm going to get mommy's dinner." I closed the door and fell to my knees as I silently cried. I stumbled my way downstairs to the office to write everything down. Every memory, every detail must be recorded. I do this to preserve my sanity and to save us. I have programmed a digital trigger into this document. If it is not deactivated each day, this information goes on the net. If you are listening to this now, I didn't make it to trigger today. I didn't manage to escape a second time. So please, if you're listening to this, gather your strength. Someone must free us from this thing.